I'm here today with the co-authors and illustrator of a new picture book titled God's Holy Darkness that celebrates instances in the story of God's people when darkness, blackness, and night are beautiful, good, and holy. Co-author Sharei Green is pursuing an MDiv at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. She's a strong commitment to community healing and Sabbath, especially in BIPOC communities. You can find her writings online at Living Lutheran, Gather Magazine, and Cafe Magazine. Co-author Beckah Selnick is a writer focusing on storytelling for digital formats. She's the host and creator of PKPK podcast. Beckah is living at the intersection of faith, funny, and feminism in Portland, Oregon. And illustrator Nikki Faison is a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, serving as the program director for African Descent Ministries. Nikki's the creator of MON Advocacy, a racial justice resource grounded in play. She's passionate about queer Black liberation, cultivating diverse leadership in faith spaces, and the art of creation. She resides in the Chicagoland area with her spouse, daughter, and 2 cats. You can learn more about all these authors and the new book at beamingbooks.com. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So I suspect that each of you are probably new to our audience. So I'd love for you to tell, each of you individually a little bit more about your backgrounds to let people know, outside of this new book, what you've been up to. Maybe Sharei, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. So my background, so I'm a Chicagoland native, born and raised on the west side of Chicago, and bit of a church nerd for like ever, and so have been extremely involved and active in various levels of church since fairly young, right? Probably 12-ish, right? And as I just turned 33, it sounds crazy to say I got 20 years of church experience, right? But yeah, so I worked at our church-wide headquarters for a couple of years, up there doing storytelling with the Lutheran Disaster Response Team. And now, I'm in seminary. I am planning a retreat for Black women healers to find rest and healing and restoration with each other. And that, plus this book, has been keeping me pretty busy.
Well, I can only imagine what, getting an MDiv would be like. So congratulations on undertaking that.
Thank you.
Beckah, you want to go next?
Sure. So I am originally from northeastern Ohio, a small town on Lake Erie called Ashtabula. And I am a double PK. So my dad is an Episcopal priest and my mom is a Lutheran pastor. And in 2007, she was elected to be our synod bishop. And in 2013, I believe, she was elected presiding bishop of the ELCA. So I am a kid of this church as much as one can be. I went to a Catholic university, John Carroll University in Cleveland, where I studied religion, actually. And after college, I served as an ELCA missionary in Bath, England through our Young Adults and Global Mission program. After I came back from that, which was about 12 years ago now, I moved to Chicago with my new husband, and I met Sharei because we overlapped at the church-wide offices where I was working and serving at the time. Currently, I'm living in Portland, Oregon, and I have a 3-year-old and one on the way. And I think that as I pivoted into writing more full-time, I didn't expect children's books to be a part of it, but being a new mom, children's books become a part of it pretty quickly and in a big way. And that was a big inspiration for how this book came about.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Nikki, go ahead.
Absolutely. So I am originally from the Metro New York area, the border of Long Island and Queens in particular. And I stayed out there for college. I did my undergrad and my MBA at Wagner College, studied sociology and history. So the understanding of why people are the way they are is like my jam, to say the least. Went to seminary in Philadelphia, Lutheran Theological Seminary, Philadelphia, to be precise. And I I actually did my pastoral internship in Argentina. So I got to serve overseas with the YELU, Iglesia Evangélica Luterana Unida, which is in Argentina and Uruguay. Right after that, I came up to the Chicagoland area, found the love of my life, got married, had a kid, right?
Oh, thanks.
That's also true, right? But yeah, so a lot of transition. I like to think that I've been to a lot of places, have seen or engaged with church in a lot of different ways. Very much like Sharei, that 20 plus year experience of serving church, being very active since my youth. And being in the Chicagoland area, I've gotten to serve as a chaplain resident at one of our Trauma One hospitals and a parish pastor for 2 years before entering the role I'm in now. So I think all of those things have really impacted the way that I see my own faith, that I want to talk about, even the kind of theology that we speak of in the book. And it's been really great and really humbling.
Very cool. Well, for what it's worth, I live in New Jersey now, but I grew up outside of Chicago. So I'm kind of with you all, in spirit, if not living there any longer.
Nice.
So let's talk about the book. As I mentioned, the title is God's Holy Darkness. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you all to collaborate to make it happen?
So it was the summer of 2020, the infamous summer of 2020. And my mom, as I mentioned, is presiding bishop Elizabeth Eaton of the ELCA. And she had written, she writes a monthly piece for Living Lutheran. And that particular piece was sort of about these instances of darkness that are good and holy. And as I was reading it, the imagery was so strong. And as I said, I'd had a lot of practice reading children's books, and it sort of read to me like a children's book. And it wasn't something that I had seen much of in my child's library. And I just thought, this is a really beautiful, impactful story. But as I was really hoping to bring it to life, I also understood it was not my story as a white woman to tell or to tell alone. And Sharei and I had worked together at the church-wide offices, and I knew that she had a background in writing and storytelling. And so I reached out to see if she would be interested. And then?
Yeah. So am I echoing to you all?
No, you're good.
Yeah, Beckah called me up, and I was just like, and I assumed she was looking for like someone to edit her work, right? Like someone to like review over, make sure it was all PC, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that. That'd be great. And then like a little bit into it, she was like, you're not like, make it your own, put some stuff in there. And I was just like, well, I don't want to like change the tone of your stuff. She was like, no, this is like our project. We're doing this together. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's a different lens, right? And so I really got into it then. And it's like meaningful work, right? As a Black woman, right? Like these are narratives that I am, as an adult, started breaking down, right? For myself, right? Like, and I just had this thing of, what if I had this? What would I have wanted myself to know, right? And so with that lens, like we kind of jumped into the project. Yeah.
Very cool. And Nikki, how did you get involved?
I believe I got the formal invitation from Beckah, but it was through Sharei's recommendation. So I had not really met, or I should say this, I didn't recall at the time meeting Beckah, even though she was actually like part of doing the paperwork when I was going out to Argentina, because that's how intimate our church is. And so Beckah had reached out and said, hey, there's this book that I want to write. This is where it's coming from. I heard you're a really good artist, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know who you heard that from, but that's a lie. I was like, this is not actually my thing, right? Like I doodle and paint for funsies, but to actually illustrate something, I don't know if I have that skill set, but yeah, let's try it. Let's do it. And at the time, right, there was really no promises, no guarantees. It was just like, we're going to put something together and see who picks us up.
Hmm.
So I think that felt really, really comfortable in that there wasn't, it was like, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. And that's okay. And yeah, so that's how I ended up getting involved in it.
Very cool.
And I just cannot allow Nick to say that she doodles sometimes. I just cannot allow it. At our last what was it called? Youth gathering, national youth gathering. Nick created this beautiful mural and turned it into like a paint by number so that everyone there could like come and like fill it in. And like also I'd seen all like the art she had made that's like hangs on her walls in her home. And like, so I knew she was a very talented artist, whether or not she's at the point where she can own it for herself. I will own it for her until she gets there.
Thank you, Sharei. Seconded.
Well, it's interesting, you know, the way that this came together with the three of you, because in many cases, the children's books folks that I work with, the author first gets a deal with the publishing house, and then the publishing house, you know, generally selects the illustrator. And so sometimes the illustrator and the author have never met before. Sometimes even after they're creating the book or have created the book, they've still never met. So it's more, in many cases, you know, not all the time by any stretch, but a lot of times it's just kind of an independent working or slightly integrated. So in your case, it was very much from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting fact. Like I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, this came together so organically. Again, our Lutheran church, as big as it is it's a small world, you know.
And I did know that piece that normally the publishing house chooses the illustrator, but I just really was adamant that this project be spearheaded by Black women. And so I sort of advocated for that very early on. And that was a place where I was not willing to compromise. So I came to pitching the book with Nick already on board, and we were sort of going to do that no matter what. But I did know that piece, and I chose not to compromise it.
Good. So what would you say the main thing is that you're all trying to accomplish with this book? Don't speak up all at once.
I would say for me, it is just to challenge that binary that we're taught, because it is so natural and so easy to fall into that. And most of the time we don't realize how we internalize that and how that plays out in different parts of our lives. So I say this even as a light-skinned Black woman, right? And we can talk about, you know, colorism within our own, you know, individual communities, but we see the way that whiteness, lightness, you know, is perpetuated in a way that feels godly, right? Or feels holy, and the way that we demonize darkness in so many different ways. It's damaging to our communities and to our children, because then they're going to grow up and continue to internalize that stuff. So I should actually step back and say there was a study done. There was a study done many years ago. I forget what it was called, but you could find it by Dr. David R. Williams. He speaks on this. He essentially measures racism as a public health issue. It's a brilliant piece. But essentially they take all of the readings that a typical college graduate would read in their lifetime. So all the books from childhood, newspaper clippings, all of that. And then they measured essentially, or took down, what words are associated with Black and white. And on a scale, more positive things, wealth, rich, safe, like words like that were associated with whiteness, where dangerous, lazy, poor were associated with Black. And so the thing that we're talking about, like what would it be just to even challenge that a little bit? It means a lot because it is such a common practice in our society on how we associate negative and positive with white and Black.
And obviously it's really important to help fight, some of those negative stereotypes that have been around for so long when children are young, right? So they don't have to unlearn, things that were maybe stamped into their, psyche at an early age. Did you all find there were many or any other books that were kind of doing this when you started this project?
I have thought about that quite a bit. There are a few, particularly in my child's library. The funny thing was early on, Nick is also a mom of a little one, and she and I would come to our meetings with stacks of children's books, and poor Sharei would be just sort of lost. So I did transcribe some children's books in the beginning. That was part of our process. But one of the books that my husband and I have really appreciated for our child is God's Dream by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And then since we have had this deal, I believe it was last year, Rachel Held Evans posthumously published a book, What is God Like? And that's a really beautiful book, but it's hard. It's not even, is it hard to find books that sort of depict God in a different way, but it's also hard to find books that don't use male, female, or particularly male pronouns for God. And my husband and I are always looking for that, and we're really in tune. And there's not a lot out there.
Yeah, that's clearly the case. I mean, I work with several other authors of color, and in particularly, in the children's book area. And so this has been a thing that we've been talking about quite a bit. And later on, after we get done with the interview, I'll share some resources with you, things that we found, just, for your guys, reference later on. But anyway, back to your book. In the book, darkness is often a space for messages from God, such as like Samuel's call to be a prophet, angels appearing to the shepherds. What about darkness do you feel lends itself to receiving holy messages?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think that there's something about darkness that, because you can't always visualize what's around you, it kind of forces you to be still, right? And so, and it's in that stillness that we listen more or better, right? And so that I feel like God is always speaking. It's in the darkness that we are still enough to hear it better. And so I think that is what, like, I think that's why it's such a powerful space for like receiving and hearing God speak to us.
Were there any stories that you felt like you wanted to include in the book, but because of, obviously children's books, you can only allow X number of words, and X is pretty small. Were there things you all had to leave out because of that?
I don't feel as if we have left anything out. There are certainly more stories and more instances that we're excited about exploring, maybe even in a later project. One of the things that Sharei has lifted up repeatedly is that we didn't have to dig deeply into the scriptures for these stories. They're there. These are the prominent stories that people know, whether they're churched or not. The angel appeared to the shepherds in the dark. That is a phrase that everyone hears at Christmas time. And I think that was really cool that we didn't have to dig deeply. There's a cool one that I haven't yet included, but I love, and that's in the desert, the pillars of smoke were actually the beacons. When people would be traveling in their big nomadic groups, they would have these poles that would burn smoke, and that's how people would see to follow. And so that idea of smoke is the beacon as opposed to light and fire is one that I would be interested in exploring down the road. But for the most part, it was really refreshing to stick to familiar places in the Bible, familiar stories.
Good. So are there any like activities or prayers to be used with children that go along with the book?
That's a great question. So we're actually still talking and working on some of that stuff on like what are some additional resources that can be available. But what I will say that is presently in the works is the creativity of our peers. So a great example would be actually this past Sunday, a dear friend of mine, Pastor Ben Groth, who's at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in New Orleans, which is the only African descent ELCA congregations in the city of New Orleans. He used he used this book, I believe actually during worship. And as they read it, he said, imagine yourself hearing this as a child. And then after asked these like really intentional questions that invoked a lot of conversation and a lot of feelings for this congregation, which is very much mixed in age, but you have a lot of elders that again are growing up in a place like New Orleans, which has a very fascinating history with segregation, desegregation, resegregation. And so we're seeing the way that pastors and leaders are using this. Another one of my colleagues, Pastor Chris in the Baltimore area, used this with his Synod Council or his, church council. And they actually used one of the pages of Samuel and did an exercise with it afterwards. So these are being used actually with adults, which is really amazing. And I look forward to seeing more with what some of our peers are going to be doing with their youth and their Sunday schools as the weeks come. And we've asked them, let us know how you do this and what comes from it.
Cool. So Nikki, let's stay with you for a minute and talk about illustrations. Kind of once you saw the words, how did you go about, coming up with illustrations? Were there anything that inspired you in particular to make that happen?
Yes. So for me, there was a few things. The first I'll say is around like God and how we're going to portray God. And I was very upfront with them in the beginning. It's like, I wanted God to look like almost the complete opposite of what many of us would probably make an association with God. And so I wanted God to look full-bodied. I wanted God to have beautiful silver locks that just flew through the sky. A God that blended in with the night sky. So there wasn't necessarily a facial image that was associated with God, but particular features that are associated with feminine Black women. That was really important because I want them to see someone's like grandma on the street and be like, yo, that looks like God. Right? Because that's what God looks like to me. So I thought that was really important. For myself, I love texture, I love pattern and color. So even though this was meant to be about darkness, I wanted to bring a lot of fun colors and design to it because when I'm thinking of what attracted me as a child, I loved children's books growing up. It was seeing vibrancy and it was seeing different styles of art where for kids, even if they didn't get the God thing in it and they're just like, okay, thanks mom for the book. I wanted them to be able to be like, wow, this is really cool. I want to try doing this. So things that would feel, things that would get their minds moving, I thought was really important. And so for me, that looked like, I'll say like the split page one. There's one, again, of Samuel, I think it is, where in the night, which like the background is really dark, and the opposite color I use for his face is like pink with like these different like gold patterns in it. But on the other side, which is supposed to be a symbol of transformation, right? He has this like darker complexion and still this beautiful afro and like the patterns on the opposite side. And so that technique itself, I just thought was really cool. And I wanted people to think of how transition looks like in that sense,
Just to like add on to Nick, I would say like when she first showed us the image of God, like I saw myself And I wept, right? As a fat Black woman with locks, I was like, that is me. Like I too am created in the image of God, right? Like I literally wept. And I don't know if I've said that out loud to Nick, but like full weeping, ugly cried.
Thank you.
Very cool. So it sounds as though there may be some ideas that are like noodling around about a follow-on book or other work that you might do together in this area.
We're very interested in the idea of a curriculum. I have a baby coming in September, which is a little bit of a natural breaking point in this process. But we're really excited for the upcoming season of Advent and sort of how this book will show up throughout the church and throughout the audiences during Advent. But a curriculum is something that we have definitely talked about and would love to have this to accompany the book.
Excellent. Well, I hope that works out. As we were talking beforehand, Beaming Books has just done a wonderful job with a lot of different, children's books and curriculum and things like that. So I really hope that they can help make that happen. So as I mentioned, the title of the book is God's Holy Darkness. You can learn more about it at beamingbooks.com. And, thank you again for sharing this with us. Thanks for doing all the work to make it happen. Congratulations on all of that. And I hope the book does really, really well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.